Following the previous installment, Avengers Infinity War, when Thanos made the snap, half of the creatures in the universe disappeared. Surviving superheroes have to live a life full of despair and regret. The villain Thanos is still out there somewhere in space. Whether the Avengers still have the strength and motivation to turn the tide. Also, are they really Endgame? Avengers Endgame premieres in 2019. It still maintains the continued success of Marvel's 21 movie series, with many beautiful angles, eye-catching effects, and epic combat sequences. The cinematography of the film is excellent. From old, young, thin, fat, all are done very honestly. Among the characters, the three pillars of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, are the most focused on portraying. But that does not mean that the filmmakers are lacking in expressing the other members. Everyone has moments to play their role. Whether it lasts throughout the movie, or lasts only for a brief 5 seconds. Avengers Endgame, indeed, is a complete ending when standing in the ranks of the previous 21 seasons. But if separated into a cinematic work, it still has many incomplete things. So before watching Endgame, make sure you've watched more than 20 movies before, for the best experience. Take a look at the film's success. As of July 21, 2019, Endgame earned $2.795 billion, while the budget was $356 million. Became the highest-grossing film of 2019, and the highest of all time. Surpassing the blockbuster Avatar by director James Cameron.
Some people move on, but not us. Not us.
The opening scene of the film takes place right after Thanos finishes collecting the 6 Infinity Stones, and snaps his fingers. Clint is still under house arrest, due to his participation in the Avengers clash 2 years ago, and violation of the Sokovia Accords. He is training his daughter Lila archery at home. The impact of the snap caused 50% of the population in the universe to disappear. How unlucky! All his family members including his wife, and 2 daughters were reduced to ashes. Clint could only bewildered to find his loved ones without knowing what happened. 3 weeks later, Tony Stark and Nebula are on the Benatar spaceship returning to Earth. The two tried very hard to improve the spacecraft, but it still did not have enough fuel. While Stark was dying, a bright light appeared. It turned out to be Captain Marvel. She found them and used her bare hands and superpowers to move the spaceship to the new Avengers base on Earth. Stark reunites with Potts and the surviving Avengers. Stark sadly tells Rogers that he has lost Peter. Rocket Raccoon only sees Nebula and realizes that all his friends are gone too. The two sat holding hands in silence. Rogers asks Stark about Thanos' clue, prompting him to burst into a furious rage. Stemming from unresolved issues between them, involving Ultron and the Avengers Civil War. He went on to say that if they had stood on the front line together, Thanos would have been defeated. Then Stark fainted from exhaustion after the long space travel. Stark was sedated while the Avengers continued to locate Thanos. Nebula says she knows where Thanos is. He has a retirement plan. After making the snap, Thanos will arrive at a place called the Garden. The Avengers set out to track down Thanos with the goal of getting the Infinity Stones back. They hope to be able to bring back half of the population in the universe. When the spacecraft arrived, Danvers flew down to probe first. As a result, Thanos is alone and unprotected. No weapons, ships or guards. In the simple hut, Thanos carried out his daily routine, living a comfortable life. Danvers suddenly burst in and pinned him down. With support from Rhodes and Banner, Thor then severed Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet of his left arm with his axe Stormbreaker. To the surprise and disappointment of the Avengers, the gauntlet didn't have any stones. Thanos explains that the stones have no use but temptation. So he used the power of the 6 stones to destroy it, disintegrating into atoms. The incident left him horribly burned. Nebula once again confirmed that what Thanos said was true because he rarely lied. Thor got angry and cut off Thanos' head. When Rocket asks, "What did you do?" Thor replied that this time he was aimed at the head, hinting that he was aiming for the chest before. Thanos didn't die, so he had a chance to snap his fingers. After that, the frustrated Avengers left, realizing there was nothing they could do to bring back those who had been lost. 5 years later, Rogers is involved in running a support group for the citizens of New York City who are struggling to live after the snap, along with their enormous losses. In a warehouse in San Francisco, a rat accidentally activates a machine, and causes Scott to be dragged out of the quantum world. Disoriented and confused, Scott believes he has only been stuck in the quantum world for about 5 hours, when something terrible has happened. Scott walked past the wall of the missing person list after the snap, frantically searching for the names on it, hoping not to find his daughter's name. When he got home to see Cassie again, he was shocked because she was a young woman now. The two reunited with a tearful hug. Realizing that Hope, Hank, and Janet were all gone, Scott immediately went to the new Avengers facility in New York. There Romanoff was having a meeting with the other Avengers, regarding the issue of the universe-wide snap consequences. When the meeting was almost over, she almost burst into tears, because the loss was so great after the snap. Rogers entered the room to comfort her, but the gloomy mood stopped when Scott arrived. Scott explains his experience in the quantum world, and how they can use it like a time machine to search for the Infinity Stones. The three have limited knowledge of the quantum world, so they decided to look to Stark. Our Iron Man is almost retiring to live a simple life with Pepper, and their young daughter Morgan. Scott proposed the idea of time stealing, and Stark was quick to criticize the idea. He feared that changing the past might erase their existence, and would fail. Stark refused and said he was finished and parted with the Avengers. If they don't want to give up, Rogers, Romanoff and Scott go find Bruce Banner, a smart man with many doctorates. The group met at a restaurant and shared the story. Surprisingly, Banner successfully used gamma radiation to transform into the Hulk, but still retains Banner's intelligence and control. After hearing about the idea of stealing the stones in the past, Banner is skeptical, because quantum physics is beyond his best. But in the end Banner agreed to help them try. While Tony was washing the dishes, he accidentally looked back at a photo of himself and Peter Parker. Stark decided to use AI Friday to simulate time travel in the quantum world. The model succeeded just before he was about to give up. Stark consults with Pepper on whether he should help the Avengers, or live a peaceful life with her mother and daughter. Pepper asks Tony if he can live with his conscience if he keeps it a secret. And she convinced Tony to return to the Avengers team. At the new Avengers facility, Banner, Rogers, and Romanoff run a time travel experiment with Scott. But instead of running Scott through the timeline, they run the timeline through Scott. Make him turn into a child, a teenager, an old man. And in the end, Banner luckily brought Scott back to the way he was at the beginning. Rogers left the building thinking about what to do next. Suddenly Stark comes to his aid, and agrees to mediate. The two men finally put their conflict aside. And Stark gives him back the captain's shield. The entire Avengers team began to assemble. Nebula and Rocket landed in the Benatar, and Rhodes landed in his suit. Banner and Rocket arrive at New Asgard in Tonsberg, Norway. It is now home to the few surviving Asgardians. They meet Thor again. He looks almost depressed after losing to Thanos, and become a fat alcoholic. Thor was just hanging around the house playing Fortnite with Korg and Meek. Although Thor tries to put on a cheerful demeanor, but he couldn't hide the pain of defeat when the name of Thanos was mentioned by Banner. Thor is informed that there is a small hope of being able to bring everyone back. But he got bored and gave up immediately. So Banner and Rocket decided to convince Thor to come along, and promised to give him a beer. Meanwhile in Tokyo, Hawkeye becomes the lone warrior Ronin and is attacking a group of Japanese Yakuza. He kills everyone. One by one, including the leader Akihiko. Natasha Romanoff tracked down and approached Barton. He emotionally begged Romanoff to give him any hope, that his family might return. The two held hands to comfort each other after the great loss. Barton finally decided to return to Avengers headquarters in search of a little hope. At Avengers headquarters, Banner and Stark completed the construction of the quantum tunnel, and technologically advanced machines, preparing for time travel trials. Banner explains that changing past events will not change the present, it will instead create a parallel universe. So they just go back in time to borrow the Infinity Stones, then return it at the exact time they were taken. Avoid creating chaos of time. Barton is a test volunteer. And he was transported to the time before Thanos snap. The location is on his farm. The experiment proved to be a success when Clint Barton brought back an object from the past. The Avengers proceed to the next stage of preparation, locating the Infinity Stones that have been present in the past. They also have a challenge. In order to time travel through the quantum world, a Pym particle is required. But Dr. Hank Pym, the inventor of the Pym particle, is dead. So they only have enough Pym particles for a round trip. The group discusses and tries to remember where the Infinity Stones are. They found 3 different stones present in New York City in 2012. The Reality Stone was on Asgard in 2013. The Soul and Strength Stones were on the planets Vormir and Morag in 2014. With the goal determined, the Avengers split into 3 separate teams. Thor and Rocket arrive in Asgard. Nebula and War Machine go to Morag. Romanoff and Barton go to Vormir. The rest Rogers, Stark, and Banner and Scott went to New York. In 2012, in New York City, the Avengers from the future scrutinized goals and split into action. Banner goes to a cathedral in New York to retrieve the Time Stone guarded by the Ancient One. Banner was very confused at this point, so the Ancient One pushed his soul out of his body. The Ancient One explains that if Banner took away the Time Stone, the timeline here would not have a strong weapon against the dark forces. He then explains that Strange gave the Time Stone to Thanos to save Stark. His world no longer has a Time Stone. The stone will be returned at the time it was removed. And Banner succeeded, convincing the Ancient One to give him the Time Stone. Meanwhile, Stark and Lang planned to steal the Space Stone located in the Tesseract block. However, Hulk suddenly jumped out of the elevator and collided with Stark. The impact caused the Tesseract to fall to Loki's side. Loki uses it to disappear in the timeline. Meanwhile, Rogers used his knowledge of Hydra. And he easily obtained the staff with the Wisdom Stone in their hands without having to fight. Rogers clashed with a version of his past self. After fighting quite hard, he finally defeated the version of Captain America and escaped. After regrouping, Stark and Lang admitted that they had failed to steal the Tesseract, leaving it in Loki's hands. However, Stark suddenly remembered, in the past there was a place where they could get the Tesseract and the Pym particle. They can go there and use this Pym to return. Rogers hands Scott the staff and tells him to go back first. Meanwhile, Stark and Rogers go to Camp Lehigh in 1970. In another development, Thor and Rocket travel to Asgard in 2013. Rocket uses the device to separate Ether from Jane Foster. Thor is distracted when he sees his mother, knowing that she will die that day at the hands of Curse. Frigga encounters Thor and learns that he is from the future. Thor couldn't contain his emotions as he stood before his dead mother in his timeline. He tries to tell Frigga about her impending death, but she refuses and advises Thor to live well. Rocket gets the Reality Stone, runs to Thor, and prepares to leave. Thor calls the hammer Mjolnir and he still deserves it. He said his last goodbyes to his mother and returned to the present. Meanwhile, Rhodes, Nebula, Romanoff and Clint went to Morag in 2014. The group split into action. Romanoff and Clint used the spaceship Benatar to reach Vormir. Nebula and Rhodes stayed in Morag. They hid and watched and saw Quill in the distance. He was on a journey to harvest the Power Stone on this planet. Quill is then ambushed by them and knocked unconscious. They finally obtained the Power Stone. Somewhere else in the universe aboard the Sanctuary 2, the 2014 version of Nebula synced data with Nebula. Thanos immediately arrives and captures Nebula before she can return with Rhodes. Through the data in Nebula's brain, Thanos learned all of the Avengers' plans and his own future. Unable to accept his fate, Thanos sent Nebula 2014 to disguise himself as Nebula and return to the future, in order to open the time portal for his army to pass through. By this time, Rogers and Stark had gone to 1970. They split up and succeeded in obtaining the Pym particle and the Tesseract. In this action, Stark meets his father from the past, Mr. Howard Stark. And Rogers reunites with Peggy Carter, his lost lover, in mixed emotions. But soon the two left behind their personal feelings to return to the present together. Upon arriving in Vormir, Romanoff and Barton were greeted by the Red Skull. They were quite surprised because they were not aware of the sacrifices that had to be made to get the emotional stone. The two get into an argument over who should die, and each tries to stop the other. Both are willing to sacrifice themselves when trying to throw themselves off the cliff. After the struggle, Clint makes a jump, but Romanoff saves him and hangs him from the cliff. She is determined to sacrifice herself, because Clint has a family waiting for him to return to save them. Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff bounced off and fell into the abyss, and then Barton woke up with the Soul Stone with indescribable emotions. The group returns to New Avengers headquarters with all 6 Infinity Stones. They immediately noticed Romanoff's absence, and Barton informed them of her death. The Avengers spend some time by the lakeside mourning her death, before continuing with their plan to use the Infinity Stones. Don't let Romanoff's sacrifice go in vain. Stark, with help from Banner and Rocket, he created the Infinity Gauntlet and attached stones to it. Rocket started the debate over who should use it. Thor claims to be the right person to use it. He considers himself to be a god, the strongest. But eventually Banner realized that the energy emitted by the glove was mainly gamma radiation. So he is the only one who can survive using the Infinity Gauntlet. Banner started putting on gloves. It caused him excruciating pain as the energy from the stones was transferred to his arm. Despite the pain and difficulty, Banner managed to successfully snap his fingers before collapsing. The Ant-Man noticed some birdsong appearing. And Hawkeye got a call from his wife. As a result, Hulk's snap was successful. Just then, the 2014 version of Nebula activated the quantum tunnel, allowing Thanos' spaceship, Sanctuary 2, to travel to the present. Thanos opened fire on Avengers headquarters, destroying the entire building. On Sanctuary 2, Gamora asks Nebula about the future. What happened between them? Nebula admits that she was determined to kill Gamora more than once, but the two eventually reconciled and became friends. Gamora ultimately decided to betray Thanos, and free the Nebula of the present. After the attack, the Avengers were separated. Thor, Rogers and Stark are still on the surface of the ruins. They decide to attack Thanos on their own. Barton finds the gauntlet deep in the rubble, and protects it from the Outriders. The 2014 version of Nebula arrives and tricks Barton into handing over the gauntlet. Before she was about to kill Barton, she was stopped by Gamora and Nebula of the present. They tried to convince her to leave Thanos but she refused. That forces the Nebula of the present to kill her past. Thor, Rogers, and Stark go head-to-head with Thanos. He changed his mind and resolved to erase the entire universe, then rebuild it his own way. Despite the advantage of numbers, with extraordinary strength, Thanos quickly defeated all 3. After Stark fainted, Rogers almost collapsed. Thanos batters Thor, and prepares to kill him with his axe Stormbreaker. Suddenly the hammer Mjolnir came from afar, knocking him away, then returning to Rogers' hand. Captain America was worthy, and was able to wield Mjolnir and the power of the God of Thunder. He unleashed powerful thunderbolts on Thanos. Thanos did not succumb to Rogers. He used his double-edged sword to break the Captain's shield. Captain fell down and then continued to stand up. Thanos spoke of his intention to destroy the entire Earth, and ordered the Black Order to descend from their spaceship, along with the army of Chitauri, Outriders, and Sakarans. Captain America is the only one left standing on the battlefield, and all hope seems to be gone. At this moment he heard a voice echoing in his ear. Suddenly the sling ring gate opened. All the superheroes that had disappeared before had returned. The first is Black Panther with Okoye and Shuri. And right after the Falcon had spread its wings in the sky, a series of sling ring gates were opened, including Doctor Strange and the Guardians of the Galaxy and Peter Parker. A series of armies of witches and other Wakanda soldiers appeared. Banner, Scott, Rhodes and Rocket also emerged from the ground, along with Scott who had turned into a giant. When everyone had gathered, Rogers summoned his hammer, and shouted the legendary line, "Avengers, assemble." The battle for the Infinity Gauntlet broke out. Stark reminded Strange of his earlier statement that out of more than 14 million timelines there was only one possibility that they would win. Stark asks, is that the timeline they are in right now? Strange claimed he couldn't tell him. If Strange did, it wouldn't have happened. Because the quantum tunnel was destroyed along with the Avengers headquarters. The safest solution right now is to bring the Infinity Stones back to the past, by means of a quantum tunnel placed in Lewis's truck, deep behind the enemy's front lines. Throughout the war, the Avengers' forces gained the upper hand. Scarlet Witch used her magic to overwhelm Thanos to avenge Vision, prompting him to order Sanctuary 2 to open fire on the battlefield. This destroyed a dam, forcing Doctor Strange to hold back the water, preventing it from flooding the battlefield and killing everyone. The witches created shields to protect the Avengers' forces during the Sanctuary 2's bombardment. In the chaos, Spider-Man obtained the gauntlet from Black Panther's place. But he is quickly attacked by Sanctuary 2's firepower. Luckily, Captain Marvel arrived just in time. She drew firepower towards her, and destroyed the ship in an instant. Captain Marvel took the gauntlet from Spider-Man and tried to take it to the quantum tunnel. Before she could do that, Thanos threw his sword and destroyed the truck. Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man once again confront Thanos to stop him, but are immediately overwhelmed. Thor and Captain America almost killed Thanos, but they were also beaten to near death. Captain Marvel overpowered Thanos for a brief moment. But in the end he threw her aside, and then put the glove on. Before he could snap his fingers to wipe out the entire universe, Captain Marvel returned once again. She forcefully held Thanos' hand, leaving him with no chance to fight back. But he turned the tide, using the Power Stone to punch Danvers away. Strange looked at Tony and raised a finger, implying that there was only one chance they could win. Stark rushes in with one last attempt to remove the gauntlet from Thanos, but he is also thrown away by him. The Mad Titan began to smug with his victory, declaring, "I am inevitable," before snapping his fingers. However, Thanos was shocked to find that the Infinity Stones were no longer on his gauntlet, and turned his attention to Stark. Iron Man used his nanotechnology suit to form a new glove. The tremendous power of the stones poured into the body. Instead of expressing pain, Stark simply said, "I am Iron Man," and then snapped his fingers. In surprise, along with horror, Thanos just sat down, accepting defeat, and turned to ashes with his entire army. Stark, after making the snap, he collapsed because of his injuries. After sharing brief and silent goodbyes with Rhodes and Parker, Tony died peacefully after being comforted by Potts that he was now rested, and they had won a complete victory. She and Morgan will be safe. The heroes reunite with their family and friends. Then a simple funeral took place to commemorate Stark's great sacrifice. Barton and Wanda comfort each other by the lake after the funeral. Thor then leaves New Asgard and crowns Valkyrie as the new queen. He joined the Guardians of the Galaxy aboard the spaceship Benatar, and traveled to space. Quill and Thor then have a humorous argument about who is the leader of the team. Rogers volunteered to go back in time to return the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir to the exact location they took them. He said goodbye to Barnes and Wilson and left. Although Banner said that Rogers would be back in 5 seconds, he didn't come back as planned. When Wilson was arguing and asked Banner to bring Rogers' ball, CK. Then Bucky noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench by the river. Wilson walks over and meets an old version of Rogers. Rogers says he has decided to stay in the past and live happily with Peggy Carter. Wilson is shocked but still accepts Rogers' choice. Rogers gave the shield to Wilson because the world needed a Captain America. Wilson says, "Do you want to tell me about life with Peggy?" Rogers replied, "No, I don't think I would." And he reminisces about the 1940s, Rogers and Carter living a happy life in a small house.